Welcome back. We're going to look at the executive branch at work today, and this includes the executive departments and the independent agencies. And as always, you can learn a great deal by reading the synopsis or the introduction at the beginning of the section. I encourage you to do that. The executive departments headed by the members of the cabinet, which are called what are the heads of the cabinet secretaries, are charged with administering a broad range of government programs and services. As the size and power of the government has grown, so too have the number of executive agencies. We started off with 4, we now have 15. And then there are independent agencies outside the executive departments. And these focus on particular aspects of governing that cannot be attended to by the executive departments. Bureaucrats and members of Congress and outside interest groups sometimes collaborate to protect and advance their mutual interests. And these are called iron triangles when they work that way. So let's get started as we look at the executive branch at work. The primary organizations of the federal government are the executive departments, which are known as cabinet posts. There are 15 cabinet posts, and independent agencies. Now, the president is over all of this. This is in the executive branch of government. But the president has some say in organizing and running these departments. Executive departments are the major units of administration, and they are headed by the cabinet secretaries. There is one exception, and that is the Attorney General, and he heads up the Department of Justice. These are sometimes referred to as cabinet level departments. And departments tend to be very broad, but within each department, there are agencies. And so, for instance, the Department of Justice is the broad category, but within the Department of Justice is the FBI. And so they are just an agency within that broad department. And there are shared responsibilities between President and Congress in these departments. The Congress usually defines the duties and power and approves the budget. President nominates secretaries to oversee the various departments. And again, the Senate has the role of advising and consenting on those nominees. Early departments, Washington only had 4. They were State, Treasury, War, and Attorney General. And in 1849, the Department of Interior was added. In 1913, the Department of Labor. And so it was slow going at first, very slow growth. Then the early 8 departments, there were only 8 for a long time: State, War, which became Department of Defense, Treasury, Interior, Agriculture, Justice, Commerce, and Labor. And you can see all of those outlined. They're outlined in your text as to what they do. And you want to familiarize yourself with those. What does each department do? And some of them are very easy, like the Department of Agriculture obviously helps farmers. Department of Commerce dealing with interstate commerce, but also international trade. Labor, workers, making sure that workers are cared for, working to improve working conditions, things of that nature. So you want to spend a little bit of time going over that list. Then executive departments that have been new since 1950, this is after World War II, there were 7 new departments that emerged, and this explains the expanding role of government. There were 8, again, departments before World War II, and 7 after. And here are the 7: Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Transportation, Energy, Education, Veterans Affairs, and Homeland Security. And again, the goals and functions are listed there for you in your book, and I would encourage you to look at those. Um, it may surprise you that the Department of Education is a relatively new department. It was created and it was at one time part of one department that was split into two departments, that became the Education Department and the Health Human Services Department now. So, at any rate, make yourself familiar with those and what their roles are. And HHS, Health and Human Services, I mentioned, it was originally part of Health, Education, and Welfare, but when education went out as its own department, um, it became the HHS in 1980. Employs about 65,000 people, protect the health of the American people. You can imagine that is a very, very important um, job now during this coronavirus outbreak. And provides social services such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, low income for all ages. Um, and so they're very important, HHS, what they do. And it contains smaller agencies. Part of the HHS is the CDC, based in Atlanta, Centers for Disease Control, and you've seen CDC director up with President Trump making announcements and such. It also includes the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which sets standards for food and for medicines. And the whole idea of was a hydrochloride. I don't even know the name of the medicine that they're trying to say can treat coronavirus, but FDA has to approve that for use. Um, Department of Defense was the War Department. It oversees the U.S. military, and it was the War Department until 1947, but they said, let's change it to the Department of Defense, much more palatable. It's the largest budget of all the departments. It has $580 billion and employs about 1.2 million people in active duty. And then there are another 800,000 National Guard and Reserve employees. And then they have about 730,000 civilian employees, people who work in the on the bases and things like that support the military. So it's pretty vast. And the newest department was created in 2003 following 9/11, was that of Homeland Security. And it's reorganized to focus on law enforcement, border security, transportation, immigration, emergency preparedness, and it includes agencies such as the United States Citizen and Immigration Services, Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, Transportation and Security Administration, TSA, anytime you fly. The Coast Guard is a part of the Homeland Security Department as well, and the United States Secret Service, and of course FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is part of that as well. So those are the executive departments. Now we want to turn to independent agencies. There are 140 independent agencies, just 15 departments, but 140 independent agencies. And these are government agencies that operate separately from the executive departments, those 15 departments, and they are required to establish, they are established to address certain issues that become too complicated or require too much specialized knowledge to handle through regular legislation. Again, they operate separately from those 15 executive departments. For instance, EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is responsible for protecting the environment and is in charge of all government programs which are responsible for such. Well, the EPA is not one of the executive departments. It is an independent agency. It's not part of defense or anything like that. It's independent. Congress approves the funding and retains the power over a lot of these independent agencies. They're somewhat they're somewhat legislative, but they're also somewhat judicial. And quasi means seeming or resembling. They kind of that platypus thing, where it looks like a duck, but it does not quite. I don't know. So it's part of both. So these can vary. These independent agencies, very large. Post Office is one of them, has over 500,000 people. Uh, the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board only has 100 people. So very large to very small. But there are three main types, and you need to know this. There are three main types of independent agencies. One, independent executive agencies. Two, independent regulatory commissions. And the third is government corporations. And we'll look at those very quickly. The independent executive agencies are government agencies that are established to oversee and manage a specific aspect of the federal government. They're not led by cabinet members. They're established by Congress, but they're primarily controlled by the executive branch. For instance, NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Program Administration. It means it's not really part of the Department of Defense. It's outside of that. Example anyway would be NASA. Agencies are broken down in various offices with various responsibilities, and presidents may even ask Congress in the State of the Union to create such agencies, and this is what President Kennedy did when the Peace Corps was established. The GSA, the Government Services Agency, helps other agencies in the federal government by buying goods and services. The National Archives and Records Administration, who keeps up with everything the government does? Who files it for history? Well, the National Archives. And if you've been to the Smithsonian Institute, they oversee some of that. So there are independent executive agencies, but then there are independent regulatory commissions. And these are government agencies that are established to regulate some aspect of the economy. These are usually bipartisan. In fact, they're always bipartisan. They're made up of members from both parties. Somewhat, again, legislative, somewhat judicial. For instance, the Federal Reserve Commission or Federal Reserve Board is made up of someone from the Independent Regulatory Commission. They fall into that category. Board members serve fixed terms and cannot be removed by the president. Interstate Commerce Commission is such a regulatory commission. Why are they independent? You might ask yourself, well, you want politics to play a minimal role, but not much of a role. So that's going to be important. Specialists were better equipped. They provide continuity in legislation. They're free from undue political influence. Bipartisan, again, made up of members from both parties. Federal Communications Commission falls into this category. They regulate radio, television, satellite, cable communications. Gives license to broadcasters and limit the use of obscene language. Securities and Exchange Commission regulates Wall Street. They're also part of this. National Industrial Recovery Act, 1933, was an independent agency as well. Looking at government corporations, I mentioned Amtrak. Government agencies, they're organized and run like businesses, but they are owned in whole or in part by the federal government and are designed to achieve a public goal. Things like U.S. Post Office, National Railroad, Amtrak, Tennessee Valley Authority. As far as the power and accountability, right here you see the president has some appointment powers. He oversees it. Congress oversees as well. Administrative procedures, you want to be familiar with that. Freedom of Information Act allows citizens access to written records so you know what's going on. And sometimes they create iron triangles. This involves a member of Congress, bureaucratic agency, one of these independent agencies, and then an interest group. And this can be a very dangerous thing. So that's all the time we have. What you